I'm David Knight, and I'm the current chair of the Hendrix board, but more for purposes of this group, I was the original chair and still the chair of the LLC, the for-profit entity that Hendrix founded to do the development in the village that you'll get to visit later this afternoon. And just to give you a little brief history before we get into the program, we basically had 125 acres that were given to us by a donor in support of the college with no restrictions on usage. And we started out, as you can imagine, using it for academic programs and the wellness center and that sort of thing. And then we got to a point to where we really weren't getting a lot of utilization out of the vast majority of it. And the board started to think about what could we do that is really unique and interesting, that will add value to the Hendrix community, that will add value to the Conway community, and that will kind of help put Hendrix on the map. And that was when we hit on the idea of doing a new urbanist development. And we went out, and several board members, our president, other members of senior staff, went out and we toured 2 or 3 different developments around the country, started working with the Duany firm who had done the overall land planning for the college, and decided that this type of a real estate development would be a fascinating thing to do because it kind of hit on a lot of the core values of Hendrix. A walkable neighborhood, real estate development that was environmentally friendly, but mostly a development that kind of worked on a sense of community. And those are things that we value at Hendrix, and those are kind of the main reasons that we hit on this particular project. And we really didn't know exactly how it would turn out, just like we didn't know that when we started real estate sales, we'd bump against the worst real estate market in the last 80 years. So there are some bumps in the road. It doesn't turn out exactly like you intended, but I think when you take a tour over there, you'll be really surprised at how quickly it's come on board and what it looks like and what a tremendous addition it's been to both the college and the community. When the new Market Square South building opens up this fall, we'll have 200 students living above the 3 buildings on the village square, and they'll be able to go downstairs and have their choice of Zaza's, Panera, a sushi restaurant, Purple Cow, a bank to get money, their bookstore, and hopefully as we continue development over there, even more amenities. So I think as a college, we're really pleased about the way the development has turned out. And I'd like to start off by thanking some of our Hendrix people who have been involved in this project. Tim Cloyd, who was the president throughout this time period, and I think if there's probably a single person that you could point to that was kind of our idea person that led the charge on it, it would be Tim. Ellis Arnold certainly played a tremendous role throughout the process. Pete Guess helped set up this program. Larry Kirshner, our architect, worked on a lot of it. Lawrence Finn, our construction manager, who literally oversaw all the bricks, steel, wood, everything going up. And of course, Ward Davis, our CEO, who's been with us running the operation. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Clinton School on this program. We've got Nikolai DePippa here and Skip Rutherford, and we've partnered with them on other programs before and always enjoy doing things with them. And then this with the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute, our first partnership, which is we have representatives here, Martha Lloyd and Kathleen Curry. And so with that, I want to introduce Dr. Martha Lloyd, and she's the executive director of the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute, which most of you know sits atop Pettagene Mountain and does some really interesting programming. She's new to the Institute, joined it just in February of 2014 after serving for 12 years as the Vice Chancellor for University Advancement at the University of Arkansas in Fort Smith and is Executive Director of their foundation. During her tenure at the foundation, she helped convert the West Ark Community College Foundation into a functional university foundation, led the development staffs and volunteers and fundraising effort, and raised gifts and pledges of $57 million, literally transforming that foundation. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, a Master of Education in Educational Leadership from the University of Arkansas, and a Doctor of Education in Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis from the University of Missouri. And Marta, would you please come up?
Thank you, David. Well, good afternoon and welcome. The Winthrop Rockefeller Institute is so pleased to partner with Hendrix College and the Clinton School on today's program on New Urbanism. I noticed and would be remiss if I didn't recognize one of our board members who's here in attendance, Barry McEwen. Barry, if you're sorry to embarrass. We began to explore the idea of social entrepreneurism as leaders in the future of philanthropy during our June 2012 conference on philanthropy. We continued that conversation in partnership with the Clinton School when we held a social entrepreneurism conference there recently at the Clinton Library. During that time, David Knight served as one of the panelists and spoke about the village at Hendrix and the ideas that led to formation of the village, and especially this idea of community that you speak of. So we're grateful that David invited us as an outcome of that to partner with them on today's program. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce to you your moderator, the panel moderator, Judge Buddy Villines. As a son of the Methodist minister, Judge Villines grew up in 7 Arkansas communities. He is a graduate of Hendrix College and the UALR School of Law. A military veteran, he served in Vietnam and received the Bronze Star. Judge Villines was elected Pulaski County Judge in 1990 after having served 6 years on the Little Rock Board of Directors as Director, Vice Mayor, and Mayor. His public service is highlighted by aggressive leadership in issues involving economic growth, education, and the environment. He has been an advocate and leader in developing public transit, specifically the River Rail trolley system, and has overseen the construction of nearly $150 million in construction projects, including the Two Rivers Park Bridge and the Big Dam Bridge, which is the longest pedestrian bicycle bridge in the world. So please welcome Judge Villines.
Thank you very much, and as an alumnus of Hendrix College, let me welcome you and tell you how much we appreciate you being here on campus. My wife and one of our daughters is also alumni of this college, and Hendrix has meant a lot to us for many, many years. We're very proud to be a part of the Hendrix family. My first chore is to introduce you to the panelists. I think you'll be really pleased with the people that we have here. They bring a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge. And I'll start immediately on my left is Galina Tachieva, an expert in regional planning, sustainable urbanism, urban redevelopment, sprawl repair, which I want to hear that, and form-based codes. A partner at Duany, Plater-Zyberk and Company, architects and town planners, directs the design and implementation of projects in the United States and around the world. Tachieva is the author of the award-winning Sprawl Repair Manual. Mackenzie, you need to get that. Which focuses on the retrofit of auto-centric suburban places into complete walkable communities. Originally from Bulgaria, where she received her architectural degree, Tachieva completed her master's degree in urban design at the University of Miami. Welcome. Robert Sharp. Robert Sharp, architect, serves as Director of Design for ERC Companies, where he has worked for the past 3 years to develop new multifamily, single-family, and commercial real estate prototypes. His design ethic is deeply rooted in the region's history, patterns, and construction methods, and he believes that significant architecture can be created by combining meaningful client collaboration with thoughtful design. He is active in the Congress for New Urbanism and is a member of the New Urban Guild. Welcome, Robert. Dr. Stella Čapek. I hope I said that right. Čapek, close. As a sociology professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Hendrix, Dr. Čapek teaches courses on the urban community, images of the city, environmental sociology, social change / social movements, medical sociology, food/culture, nature, and a creative writing class called Exploring Nature Writing. She is especially interested in sustainable community design and is currently involved in an I didn't learn this word at Hendrix, ethnographic study at Little Rock, South Main neighborhood. Dr. Čapek is the past chair of the American Sociological Association's Environment and Technology section. She has co-authored 2 books, Community versus Commodity, Tenants and the American City, and Come Lovely and Soothing Death, the Right to Die movement in the United States. Her other publications include articles on environmental justice, urban community issues, sustainable design, and health and environment. She also publishes environmentally themed creative nonfiction and is an alumna of Boston University and received her master's degree and doctorate from the University of Texas at Austin. Ward Davis is CEO of the Village at Hendrix. He directs the activities of the Village at Hendrix, a new urban neighborhood adjacent to the Hendrix campus. The Village at Hendrix thoughtfully combines restaurant, retail, and office space with a range of residential options, including apartments, student housing, carriage houses, and both small and large single-family homes. He is an alumnus of Davidson College and earned a general course diploma in economics from the London School of Economics and Political Science and an MBA from the University of Virginia. Please welcome our panelists. I thought we'd start, I've been in this business a long time, and every few years it seems like there is some new concept that's thrown out and they'll put some name on it. When I first saw New Urbanism, I thought, what in the world does that mean? And I'm going to start with that kind of a question to Galina. If there's a new urbanism, is there or was there an old urbanism? And what was in between?
A very good question. Just first to say that I'm really nervous, and I should not be, because the first time I came here was in 1996. I just cannot believe this. This was the first time we came here for the design of the master plan of the college. And it was, what I remember is that the weather was exactly the same, and it was like the end of November, I believe. So it was a great welcome. So this is just, I'm saying to just get my... so I'm really excited to be here yet again after a few, it's like 18 years. I did the calculation right now, and it's totally amazing. It is wonderful to see what's happening on the campus and what's happening with the village. And we are always excited to see the projects which we put on paper, become reality. And to realize that so many efforts, so many people, so many hands, so many brains, so many desires and passions have gone into the making of these places. And actually it takes a while. It's for 18 years, yes, it's a great progress, but if you put it in perspective, actually it's not tremendously, fast and radical. So this is one thing which is actually common to the old urbanism and to the new urbanism. The making of community takes time. It is a creation of a human endeavor which takes a lot of patience and a lot of years. Why new urbanism? Well, it's not new anymore. It started about 30 years ago, and it was a reform movement. Reform from what? It took a lot of inspiration from the old urbanism. The old urbanism is just the urbanism which served people, pedestrians. You could walk everywhere, and many of you probably remember the places where they grew up. I remember, coming from Eastern Europe, I remember these places. And I remember that sometime in the, when I was in school, I started realizing that there is something wrong with our environment. This is when the old urbanism actually was transformed into a very car-oriented environment in the mid-century of the 20th century. This happened when the car became the main means of going everywhere about everything. It was like the great means of freedom. And this is when the old urbanism, or the walkable urbanism, became a car-dependent urbanism. This is how the new urbanism was born, as a reaction against this car-oriented type of development, which we call, the harsh name is sprawl. The less harsh name is suburban development, exurban development, dispersed city. These are the softer ones. My book is called The Sprawl Repair Manual because I thought, well, for a car-oriented world, a connotation, related to a car is good. Your car breaks down and then you repair it, you need a manual. So it's like the Sprawl Repair Manual came from there. So the whole movement, the new urbanism, which was, about 30 years ago, came as a reaction towards this type of only dependence on the car. How to build these communities, the know-how we learned from the historic precedents of the prior generation of buildings, whether 100 years ago or in the beginning of the 20th centuries, before the car became the kind of everyday tool of moving around.
Thank you. Thank you. John Nolan was in the old urbanism, and he did some work in Little Rock many years ago. Rob, could tell us what that means, though, in terms of design. If you've got, whether it's a built environment that you're trying to change, or what is an architect, what do you do to try to implement these values? I know, as you said, the history of an area and all that. What are the things that you bring into play?
First of all, sort of I got into new urbanism originally as more of an aesthetic idea in terms of I responded to the type of architecture that was typically in new urbanist environments, and I started life as a history major, and so I was always interested in culture and how things were built and what ideas survived and grew over centuries. And so I I was always approaching the idea from an historic and a cultural idea. And typically what I've learned and what a lot of people have learned is that people that are interested, developers or builders that are interested in fine-grained, walkable urbanism also tend to be interested in handcrafted architecture or very practical architecture. And so it's sort of a natural fit in that term. And the other thing that I quickly learned coming out of school is that you could design a very beautiful building, but if it was surrounded by a parking lot behind a drainage ditch with a 6-lane highway in front of it, it didn't matter how good the architecture was, the overall experience was pretty poor. And so what the new urbanists have done is really create a palette for decent architecture to be built. And it lowers the bar in a sense that if it's a nice walkable street with good trees and that all the houses are sort of contributing to the public realm, each individual house can be, again, fairly modest and fairly sensible, but the overall sense of place is really strong and really wonderful. And so in a sense, it gives architects a place to work where, in a way, the bar is lowered in terms of it doesn't have to be a masterpiece to be successful. but in the other sense, the bar is raised because people are walking by at 2 or 3 miles an hour instead of driving by at 40 miles an hour. And when you can drive by something at 40 miles an hour, it tends to produce a cartoon architecture that you're going to see it for a few seconds. In commercial terms, that things have to be very colorful and big signage. In residential terms, that's where we get the house with 14 gables and 6 kind of different exterior materials, because it's trying to make an instant impression of fanciness or something. And so I think the new urbanists have created the architectural equivalent of slow food, where it's something that you can slow down enough to appreciate it, and so it tends to reset the value scale.
And Stella, you've heard these two folks, and I think particularly Rob, talk about kind of the design and what may happen or may. You've done some research and writing on how do people feel about living in a place like that as compared to the bad word sprawl, or just modernism, what I tend to think about it.
I can figure out where to change this. Is that working?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm not an expert on new urbanism in the sense that I've spent a lot of time systematically researching people who live in new urban communities, but I have spent a lot of time listening more informally to, including some of our people here in the Hendrix village who move into those communities, and also studying some of the comparative research on it. And one of the things that I notice a lot is that people feel that it's a certain kind of common sense. It's a way of doing things that made sense at one time, and I guess we were talking about the old urbanism and particularly the walkability of those designs. One of my favorite sociologists is someone who studies sort of micro-level sociology, and he talks about how urban cultural identity is enacted in particular places. His name is Ian Borer, by the way. And so I pay special attention, among other things, to how what kind of identity people have, or what kind of identity they celebrate when they move into this type of a community. And I hear very positive things. I hear people who are looking for an alternative to suburbia, especially an alternative to sprawl. I hear people who say they're looking for a chance to come out of their houses and have easy interaction with other people, unscripted, easy interaction with other people. I hear people praising the concept of not having a lawn that has to be maintained and give you a certain status, but it's a lot of work. I hear people who feel more safe being in a community where people know each other and have a chance to slow down and appreciate what's around them. And I think Jane Jacobs and many other people wrote about how communities where there are a lot of eyes on the outdoors are kind of self-monitoring in terms of safety. So some of those informal networks add to a feeling of safety. And some of the folks really like the idea of a more ecologically conscious lifestyle. Whether it's that you're not driving everywhere for your job or entertainment. And there would be some other things on the list as well, but also aesthetically, a lot of people find it pleasing. It's not like a co-housing community where you would design the whole thing yourself from the ground up with a group of people, but people do have input into the design. So there's an element of creativity, and I think Borer would say there's a kind of nice expanded sense of self. Hendrix would probably like to say unto the whole person. Expanded sense of self that people felt they were losing through other urban and suburban models. So those are just a few of the things that would stand out, I think.
Okay, Ward, I'm a property owner. I want to develop some property. I've heard all this about environment and people feeling good, and I like that, but why should I do this? I mean, ultimately, for the property owner or developer, there's a bottom line. And I'm getting ready to make a major investment. Will I get a return on my dollar?
That's a great question, because one of the aspects of great urban design is the design aspect. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of dollars, and it takes a lot of patience on the design side. But in the end, what you end up with is value that's created outside of the materials that are used to build a house, or even a lot of times the architecture at the village stands out to people. But really, the homes in the village started selling really well. There were kind of 3 stages in the sales of the village. The first was selling the concept of the village. And when I took over the village project, they had sold 3 homes, and we were building a model home that we ended up using as our office. So I was really selling the idea of what it would be like to live in the village, and got a handful of early adopters. And then we had both sides of a street built, and people could see the beautiful architecture, but they were kind of fixated on the architecture of the neighborhood, but didn't quite grasp what it would be like to live in the neighborhood. And when we had, and this is reasonably common when I talk to other developers of new urban neighborhoods, when we had about 20 or 25 occupied homes, and people could really feel what it was like to live in the neighborhood, and feel the interaction with the commercial, and feel the interaction with the small houses and the big houses in the apartments. That's when the sales actually took off for the neighborhood. And then the next thing we knew, we'd sold out the first phase. So, which actually kind of caught us a little bit by surprise, because we're just now designing the next phase. But one of the that's kind of the anecdotal side of it. But as far as dollars and cents go, we just set a Conway record about 3 months ago with the resale of a shotgun cottage. And when we first started building these little rectangular boxes, we built 3 of them in a row, and people thought, what are you doing? You've got these great big nice houses, and then you've got these 3 little shotgun cottages. Well, we just had a resale of one of those for $203 a square foot. And I got asked by a group of realtors, what was it about those shotgun cottages? What kind of upgrades did that cottage have? And I was like, we built that as a spec. It had the lowest level of finish out we could possibly have. Well, what is it about that house? Didn't have anything to do with the house. It was actually the most affordable product we had in the neighborhood. Somebody wanted to live in the neighborhood, fit their lifestyle, and they could make it work. And there was competition about the house. So the value is created by what it feels like to live in the neighborhood. The value isn't created by even the beautiful architecture. It's actually created by what it's like to live in the neighborhood.
So a different way of saying location, location, location.
That's right, and you're creating the location. That's right.
Okay. By the way, we will have a small amount of time for questions that you have. If you'll write them out, pass them down. I'm not sure. I think the folks over here may be collecting, and then toward the end, we'll try to get some questions in. All right. Yeah, okay. We kind of got a basic now. There's another movement that's been going on the last 10, 15, 20 years now, and that's LEEDs, the U.S. Green Building Council. Is there a relationship? Are the goals kind of the same or mixed? I know the friction at times, but for you, Galina, start.
Well, that's also another good question, and it's probably something which I didn't expect from you. Yes, I mean the LEED movement and the LEED certification is something which is very much on our radar, and it first started as related to green architecture. Basically, buildings were given special certificates for performance, for environmental performance. What we found out is that all these wonderful medals of glory, platinum and gold and silver were given to buildings which, yes, they were performing well just per square foot or as a building itself, but as Rob was mentioning, some of them were located in very weird locations. You had to drive to the place, all of your employees drive to your platinum building. So yes, you save on the building itself, but how about the overall picture? How about the context? So the CNU, or the Congress for the New Urbanism, has been working for the past probably maybe 10 years already on another LEED certification, which is called the LEED Neighborhood Design Certification, which is actually looking at the neighborhood and the context, the urban context, and how buildings relate to this urban context, and also how whole communities can be certified as green. For us, it was, especially for our firm, this always has been slightly controversial because the new urbanism has many phases. We don't do, maybe for many of you, the greenfield work mostly, some of the resorts, and they become usually the famous ones. But we as new urbanists, we work in many different scales and many different geographical locations, from regional planning to urban redevelopments, to infill, to affordable housing, to all of these brownfields. So there are many different things, including sprawl repair or suburban retrofit, which is basically in these dispersed locations, infilling stuff. And some of these projects actually could not get any of these certifications, the LEED ND, for example. So we work together with the CNU to improve on these, on the categories or all the factors which were taken into consideration for these awards and certificates. The thing is that also we found out that it's a very complex and expensive process. For a building to be certified, it takes thousands of dollars. For a community to be certified, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars just to make the list of everything what is required. And the process is still complicated. So there are many things which we are very critical about. We don't take it as we are going to go for every community with a LEED certification. No. Actually, if it's a good common sense community, which is based on good bones, on good sustainability principles from the point of view of walkability, connectivity, complexity, diversity, all these good things, then at the end of the day, it will be really sustainable. You have to give it time to a certain extent.
That's very well put. A couple of others, we started the U.S. Green Building chapter, Arkansas chapter, about 13 years ago. And Congress and New Urbanism has had a big impact, because you're right, there was a time you could build a group out in the middle of nowhere. Well, that is now really frowned on. It's really said by USGBC that you need to be in the denser area, you need to be next to public transit, you need to be, all those things are falling in line, and the costs, by the way, are not nearly as big as they used to be either. But having said that, Rob, we talk about density, but what we've said here, and really, although the village is starting to mix density in, how do you go into an existing urban area? I'm talking about, let's just, South Main is kind of like that, but South Main is really less dense. How do you get into a real urban area like a block in downtown Little Rock, or Bryant is trying to look at, I believe, toward your town square and that whole area around that. Basically, I can't remember. Mayor Townsend's here, and they've done a lot of this. Of course, the village is in his city. But how do you look at an existing area and say, all right, we're going to plop down new urban right here on this block? I mean, what does that really mean?
Okay, my experience is mostly in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and so it's a small college town. It's fairly typical southern town, and it's like many historic towns. It's got a pretty decent square and a couple of blocks of fairly good urbanism, and we've got a couple nice streets with big pretty houses. But mostly the reason I really got interested in what Galina was doing is because this idea of sprawl repair. Fayetteville's got some areas where are clearly just stripped out commercial areas that everyone agrees are pretty grim. But we also, even in our downtown core, the phrase I use is that in Fayetteville, sprawl goes all the way to the bone. I mean, you go all the way to downtown and you'll have a drive-in branch bank. And so there's continually these missing pieces, particularly a lot of surface parking lots. And so just in order to not become overwhelmed by the task, my philosophy is I'm trying to create fragments of urbanism, and they eventually will, hopefully with the successors projects and the next generation, will add up to decent urbanism. And so a lot of times we're only able to do maybe one courtyard apartment that creates just a small human scale piece, or like we did one project one time, we took an old car dealership and turned it into a mixed use building. One was a chicken feed mill that became a mixed use building. And so there's a lot of, you sort of look for opportunities where they occur, and that's also where part of, I think, the culture and history comes in. Like, you know, if we're working in Boston, we would have beautiful red brick multi-story buildings that we could work on and, you know, maybe talk about switching the windows out. You know, in most of Arkansas, you're dealing with old car dealerships and old strip centers and old agricultural buildings, and so there's a real working with that type of building type, you can create a decent urbanism but still have that sense of what was there before.
Right.
And so that's really I think in working infill type settings, that's a philosophy that I think is consistent with new urbanist principles.
Okay. Okay, Ward, you convinced me to do it now. Where do I find the money?
That's always a good question. I've always found the great design, great project, great concept it's easier to find money than people normally think. I mean, money usually is chasing great projects. So.
Yeah, but this is new. I mean,
That's right.
if you got out of the traditional and we're no longer out in the greenfield and you're talking about doing something like that, I mean, are banks falling in line to give you the money?
You actually run into some roadblocks with conventional financing sources sometimes. Both at the kind of the macro scale and at the micro scale. At the macro scale, you don't go to a bank and tell them how new it is and how new your concept is. You really try to build off of the concepts and, the areas that you can grasp. So, and it's not dissimilar from selling the houses to the first neighbors. You have to give them something that they can grasp. In Central Arkansas, you ask people what are their 4 or 5 favorite neighborhoods in Central Arkansas, and usually the Heights, Hillcrest, Quapaw area of Little Rock, they always come to mind because they're great neighborhoods. And then you ask them, well, why are they great neighborhoods? Well, it's because they have a mix of unit types, a mix of uses. You got things for people to do. You have walkability. That doesn't mean you've got sidewalks, so you have the ability to walk. It's walkability because you have some place to walk to, and there's something to see when you're walking there. So, once you kind of explain that to financing sources, then they can move forward from there. And then you can start showing. The great thing about where we are, the new urbanism is, I guess, 30 years old, according to Galina. There are enough success stories to be able to point to. There was a study done probably 10 or 12 years ago called Valuing the New Urbanism, and it's been updated somewhat since then, where they compared 5 new urban neighborhoods to kind of the predominant development style in these cities, and compared home premiums in those neighborhoods and commercial leases and that sort of thing to see what the value was. And what they showed is that consistently there was between a 15 and a 25% premium for a home once you control for, the quality of the house and the, how many bathrooms and bedrooms it has. There was consistently a 15 to 25% premium. And I think in areas where there is less quality in the urbanism, the spread can actually be wider. Well, so once you can start documenting those sorts of things, you can usually get the financing along. On the micro scale, you run into some really odd things because of government regulation of, for instance, the mortgage market. And it's really hard to do mixed-use buildings, vertically mixed-use buildings, because if you have more than 25% of the building as commercial space, well, you can't get conventional financing. Well, that, a 3-story downtown building is now not financeable. I mean, it was a dominant building type, 100 years ago. The new urbanists have kind of gotten together, and they are working with the powers that be in Washington to change that. And actually, there seems to be a lot of momentum there. So, so both on the macro scale and the micro scale, you've got to think through how you put together the financing. It's not as easy as putting together the financing for a single-use project like a garden-style apartment project or a strip center.
Okay. Stella, in your research and you're thinking about it and reading others, and I'm not sure this is a fair question, but I'm a county judge, so it doesn't matter. You mentioned sustainability, but is this the kind of movement or kind of way of dealing things that's sustainable? Is the idea of this behind this new urbanism, the things that it does, is that over, if it's been 30 years and it had lapsed in time, is it going to be sustainable, and what might cause it to be sustainable if you've got an idea or thought?
Well, that is a big question, and one of the ways to answer that is that, as is obvious from our other panelists, is that new urbanism is constantly evolving and learning, and the umbrella of new urbanism is much bigger than what we see, in any one given place. So maybe, the answer is maybe, it is. Some of the critiques of new urbanism have been that it contributes to ecological sustainability, but not enough. And it relies on, I guess, what one of my other sociology colleagues, Andy Zaz, would call shopping your way to environmentalism or something like that. It relies on people buying individual houses, relatively upscale houses, which is the other question that comes up, who is in and who is out. But, and the houses have a green design, and there's walkability, and we're fixing a lot of the things that are problems in suburbia. But many people have suggested that, particularly in an era of climate change where things are much more wildly unpredictable and where we're on a very fast-moving train doing some slow things, that we're going to have to work a lot harder and have a lot of diversity in our models that would address questions of sustainability. And I was interested, I didn't even know this, because if you listen to my bio, I teach most of the time and barely get to read the things that are of great interest to me, but I noticed that Andres Duany wrote a book in 2011 that was about putting urban space together with farm space. And I actually even wrote down the title, so I won't. Garden Cities. Yeah, theory and practice of agrarian urbanism. And I wouldn't know about that if one of my students who's here in the audience hadn't done I had them go out and look for relevant articles for images of the city. But I thought that was really interesting because he also was saying we're not moving fast enough probably on issues like addressing ecological sustainability of the sort that we would need in the face of the evidence about climate change. And he's also picking up on dynamic movements like the local food movement, and also the insight that quite a few people have had that we're going to need a lot of diversity to grow our food in changing climatic conditions, including integrating that into urban places. So I thought that itself was a kind of interesting example of the ongoing evolution of new urbanism and the need to constantly not say there's one model and this urban village is it, right? We know, there are a lot of wonderful things about the Hendrix village, but it's not going to solve our environmental problems. So that's kind of the bigger answer. And I think new urbanism could, and it also could if it finds a way to incorporate elements of the population that don't find it quite as easy to find money, even though it can be easier to find than we sometimes think. How's that?
That's really good. $240,000 for a shotgun isn't going to get a lot of people coming up. Yes, please.
Talking about affordable housing, I don't know whether many of you know the influence the Congress for the New Urbanism had with Hope 6 and with affordable housing in this country. 20 years ago, or more than that, kind of the urban renewal was the fashion in providing affordable housing in our cities. And then at some point, actually, the director of HUD, I guess, he went to one of these new urbanist communities, and he basically saw the model going back to the older type of urbanism actually made much more sense. The neighborhoods which were replaced with the towers in the green, putting everybody, the people who cannot afford the expensive houses, they put them in big towers, which is exactly the opposite of everything what they knew and how they lived, how people lived in their neighborhoods. So actually he changed the rules and the principles of the HUD, of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, to follow this type of neighborhoods, the traditional neighborhood design, based on the new urbanism. So actually we have a long history in solving some of these problems, including a lot of projects which are in the inner city. Many neighborhoods were revitalized, and we are actually not so famous or not so notorious about these projects, which actually take much longer and are much more difficult, and then we don't have our names after them. You know, there are like many cities around the country which received new master plans and new codes in order to enable, you know, housing and infill on a smaller incremental basis. We see the results many years after. West Palm Beach, we did the master plan in 1993, which is, you know, a long time ago. Today we see some results already, you know, and we see incremental development and larger projects and bigger projects, but it's not the mess which it was 20 years ago with all the crime and all the real, you know, kind of really run down downtown. And that's just one example among many others. So yes, we have been criticized many times about the affordability element, but it is not because we want to create communities which are extravagant and only for the rich. You know, it just happens that there is this need for such environments, and there are not that many around the country. So it's like they go up in price right away, very fast.
Rob?
The affordable issue is one that's very close to my heart. I'm on a nonprofit board called Partners for Better Housing in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and we're developing a project that's 78 owner-occupied, energy-efficient houses that is done entirely on a new urbanist model because we feel that the most important thing in terms of both sustainability and affordability is provide a house where a family can live with maybe one car that's not completely reliable, but they can still get to work and get everywhere they need to go. The new urbanism is great in terms of if you have a smaller house, you still can have a very complete and big life because of the public realm that you participate in. And so in terms of building small energy efficient houses and having the focus really be on the public realm and having the location be in a place where they're not totally auto dependent, then we think is very important for affordability. There's a term that we often talk about called automotive poverty in Arkansas, where you have, you know, a $20,000 house with 6 broken down cars in the driveway because everybody that lives there has to drive everywhere. And so that's really a critical aspect of dealing with the affordable housing issue. And again, it's that we came to the new urbanist approach completely out of just being rational about what it costs to run a whole household when you include in terms of, you know, energy and transportation costs.
There's one way to drive down. I mean, it's a supply and demand issue. There's a way to drive down the $200 a foot for a shotgun cottage, and that's supply. You know, I mean, if you build more great places, then the price will go up. It's important to note that we didn't set the price at $200 a foot. The market bid it up to $200 a foot. So, and it's a function of supply. There are less great places. It's hard to find a great place. And when you find a great place, people bid it up, you know. So we need to build more, better places.
If you got, God bless America. Hendrix gentleman doesn't use the other bad words. Anyway, if you do have questions, get them written down, pass to the side. These folks pick them up because we're going to start those in about 2 minutes. I still am a little bit concerned. You know, we talk about the environment, we talk about sprawl's bad, and we talk about principally right now, although we've gotten into it a little bit, about infill. And by the way, I believe HUD's done some of that redone housing in Little Rock, and it is a lot better than it was. But here's my concern is we know the population in the world, and indeed around this country and the state, is going to continue to increase. And if we don't figure out a way to have higher densities that are attractive, livable, and create the place that Ward was talking about, we're going to continue to sprawl. I mean, you know, and my biggest fear is we've gotten in such a mode now with our transportation departments called highway departments, which is what they do. But I've come to the conclusion over the years is a highway is like a jail. You keep building big enough or wide enough. they're going to always fill up. And to give you, I was talking to the highway department director the other day, we were talking about that challenge, and you know, they're experiencing the same frustration from a different point of view. They widened the area between Little Rock and Bryant and Benton just a few years ago. It's already back to where it was, congested, and it just keeps attracting more cars. So the last question I'll ask at this point, and we'll ask some others, to anyone on the panel, how do you take this idea, this thought of new urbanism, and look at it in a, not just an infill. I mean, you mentioned taking old buildings and kind of burning them, but how can you get that done on a more intense basis? How do you push it? You say it does take a long time, but how do you get it from a public policymaker? How do you get it across to the developers and the population? We need to do that. Well, it's about 3 hours long. The point is, how do you? I'm talking policymaker, and the policymaker just tries to put it out to the people and to developers, people in the business. How do you begin to talk to people about building not that quaint little house, but to build and populate a more dense environment so transit would work, be more feasible, and we wouldn't have to build and widen more highway? How do you get people to do that?
Well, from my experience in this movement, I have learned one big lesson, and it is that you cannot force people into any kind of environment. You have to entice them. You have to look at the places which they love, which is a very easy thing to do. You go here in Little Rock, okay, what is the best neighborhood? This is how we looked at the village. How do we create something which will be loved in Little Rock? I don't remember now the names. Tim, help me. Hillcrest, or, I remember Hillcrest was a pretty good neighborhood. Well, they had, everything. Probably is not the best example of super high density. But, you go to other places and then you see, the super high density of New York. This is the most environmental place, the greenest. Well, there are neighborhoods there which are much lower density. They have the great brownstones, and they have a great mix of small apartments. They have other things going on there. So you resolve these things first very contextually. You cannot resolve the density problem or the compact living the same way you resolve it in Arkansas, the same way we resolve it in Phoenix or in Miami or in Brazil. Every place is slightly different. You have to find a kind of the spot where people will enjoy life and they will want to work there, to live there. There is a book which is very good one, recent one, called The Happy City, which actually talks about the places of very high density, Vancouver, the big shots, in the green, sustainable environment, Vancouver and New York. Well, they found out that people are not the happiest in the big towers. With the highest density, we're not going to resolve our problem of sustainability. We have to find a place where people are happy and they will want to live in these places. And maybe for some, a tower is great, but this may be for the richer, where the towers really can be very well maintained. For the poorest population, for the affordable housing, it just doesn't work. Nobody can maintain these towers. People don't know how to live in them. They will prefer something smaller. And there are great American neighborhoods where there are astonishing densities. Talking about pure net densities of per acre, which is only the statistics, and it gives you incredible lifestyle. Let's talk about Charleston. 36, 40 units to the acre. Is your, great neighborhood of Charleston with only single-family houses? How is that possible? Why don't we go into the know-how to make these neighborhoods work with mix of things? So it's not, the answer is not the ultimate density, where we pack people and we say, we are resolving everything, because these are not going to be happy cities.
The part of your question, I think, is very interesting to me in terms of the transportation side of it, because if you're interested at all in development, you learn that every time that a public funds a road, you've enriched the property owners on either side of the road. So there's an incredible transfer of wealth every time a highway is built or widened. And it's sobering to me that when we had our recent referendum, the voters of Arkansas voted to pay for highway interchanges and expansions with a sales tax. And so clearly the voter welcomes new roads, and it's a sign of freedom and prosperity and mobility and all the good things. And so I think we have a real deeply embedded love of automobility that is very difficult to overcome in terms of trying to create a sustainable environment. There's some wonderful sustainable environments that are all about walking and bicycling, but until we can, again, use the word entice the culture at large that this is a superior quality of life, it doesn't matter. Ward can do 42 projects and he won't be able to overcome the thousands of acres of new land that's being opened up by the highway system. And so that's really, culturally, I think that's our biggest challenge, at least in this part of the world.
Real quick.
Just real quick, part of it is that we are essentially subsidizing, bad sprawl development by, running the infrastructure out into the hinterlands. And the problem is the cul-de-sac neighborhood that has, miles and miles of road frontage, quarter mile of road frontage per house. When the cities have to replace that infrastructure, there's not the money in place. There's, kind of money in place to fill potholes, but when they actually have to replace that infrastructure that's in the ground, it's not going to be there. So right now we've got an implicit subsidy for bad development.
We've got probably 30, 40 questions. I've tried to, because we don't have but 5 minutes left. So I tried to pick through real quickly, obviously, what really hadn't been asked. And what this question I don't think has really been asked or really expanded on, I'd like to ask any member or all of it. And that is, what role does diversity and inclusion play in planning new urban communities, and what happens if people are displaced? Anybody?
What happened to people who are displaced?
Displaced by the development. So, what role does diversity and inclusion play in planning?
Again, this is coming from the Fayetteville side of things, but typically the displacement that we deal with mostly is asphalt parking lots that are being displaced. And so because things are so low slung where we are, it's not like a project of gentrification like you'd have maybe in Chicago, where you've got great old affordable ethnic neighborhoods that are being leveled and turned into projects. It's usually a case of really underperforming asphalt coming up to a little bit higher level of quality. And in terms of diversity and openness, it's something that new urbanists get criticized a lot for in terms of the homogeneous communities that are, and it's I think a lot of it because a lot of the early projects that got a lot of press were resort type developments and extremely popular developments, and they attracted rich people like flies. And so if you want to go down and be on the beach and be surrounded by wealthy people, that's where you want to go. But as Galina said, there are a lot of really great urbanist projects that have not gotten a lot of press that are extremely diverse in income and every other measurement, but they're harder to find.
Ward?
You go to a new urban neighborhood. We'll just use the village as an example. Can you hear me? We'll use the village as an example. We've got small one-bedroom, 650 square foot apartments. We've got tiny little houses that we talked about earlier. We've got medium-sized houses. We've got large houses. We have live works. We accommodate a variety of lifestyles. People that make a variety of incomes can live in the village, comfortably live in the village. If I drive out West Conway through the suburban neighborhoods, I can tell you plus or minus 10% what probably everybody in each individual neighborhood makes for a living, just because the people that make a little bit more money, they move over to this neighborhood. The people that make a little bit less money, they get downgraded to this neighborhood. And a neighborhood like the village actually incorporates a lot of different people and a lot of different incomes.
Well, gosh. They said they were going to hold up a sign when it was time to be over with. And I think they've sent me a sign. It is right at that moment, just time. There are a lot of other good questions that I wish I could have gotten to, but it is that time. Let me summarize it in a different way. after 30 years in this office and 6 others in the city, well, 30 years in both, I've always seemed like there was some new idea, and sometimes several at the same time. Now, you've heard, and that's the reason I asked the question, that there is some conflict between the U.S. Green Building Council and the new urbanists, but they are talking to each other and working out, coming around. And I think maybe in a combination of the two basic concepts, one primarily started out as how to save energy, but now it's gone far beyond that, that being USGBC, and it talks about quality of life. Site selection has become very important. Site selection is obviously very important to them. So what I hope we take away from here today is that in the new urban concept, really goes back to where, in my mind, in the small town I grew up in, an area that was based on grids, not streets so wide, sidewalks, where you could really connect with people. And as opposed to the automobile design communities that we've done now for, God help us, the last nearly 100 years, where in those other communities and in new urban communities, you can connect with human beings. In the car design community, well, you don't want to connect in another car. It's a bad thing. And what I think is coming on helping persuade people is that fact that people have begun finally to accept and realize that the car, while it may give them a lot of freedom, it also imprisons them. You lose your freedom because you can only go where the car tells you can go, and you can only stop where it tells you you can find a place to park it. And we've wasted so much land. So as you go from this today, I hope you'll go back in yourselves, but into your communities and say, all right, this is an idea that we ought to explore for certain parts of our area and our community, but there are other ways too that might even make it a little bit better or make it where we can persuade our folks. Thank you very much for being here. Look at all these notes. Let me get you the rest of these notes.
She's weird.
Oh, wait a minute. We got a door prize. Don't give away.
Got a real quick door prize. I'm gonna pull two cards. Let's see. I got Morgan Plumley and Mark Tidwell. And I also want to invite people to meet in Market Square, which is across the pedestrian bridge over in the village for tours of the neighborhood. We're going to keep the tours short because the weather isn't as nice as it was over the weekend. But I think with the panelists that we have, you can get a lot of the fine-grained points that we were trying to make and ask several of your questions as well in these little tours. And then after that, a group of us are going to kind of set up shop in Zaza. If anybody wants to come over and ask questions and maybe have a drink with us, that'd be great. So I want to invite people to both of those things. Thank you.
Hey, Ward.
Yes, sir.
Some of them, particularly in the last question I asked, kind of covered them about cost and university and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. I think you're right. These mine?
Yeah.
All right.